Yeah, I think this has already been said. Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been wondering what on earth made me put my name down to do this particular Sunday. Advent 3, Matthew 1, topic Joseph. And as we've, it must seem like a good idea at the time, but as we've seen, it's actually quite hard to find bits about Joseph. Jumping through, the main point, it seems to me, is this, that Joseph was an ordinary man, an everyday person, just like us, but he was given an extraordinary calling. And one of the things we have to do in trying to understand this man is to get hold of the culture of the day. Indeed, some of the ancient lifestyles and attitudes in Middle Eastern communities, as with other parts of the world, are still prevalent today. I've been rereading some semi-fictional accounts of the nativity story to try and get my head around and practice the habit of living the scriptures. I've mentioned it to people before, that method by which you consider the narrative and you try to imagine yourself there in it. It may help if you're doing a process of this to immerse yourself in a film or a dramatized documentary or something like that, whether it's King of Kings or Jesus of Nazareth or Exodus or the Nativity story, or even, dare I say, I know it's not the time scale, Fiddler on the Roof. It gets you into the mindset of the culture. Do allow for artistic license and don't take these things as definitive study guides, please. But in Western society these days, I suspect relatively little notice is taken or would be taken of this unmarried teenage Mary becoming pregnant. But that's enough of an introduction. I'm going to ask Mary to read. Yeah, you can read this one if you like. That one. Yeah, there you go. And the reading is Matthew 1, verses 18 to 25.
This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and he took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus.
Lovely, thank you. 3 things I'd particularly like to take away today, and some of these overlap with what we've already heard. But the first concerns Joseph's ancestry or genealogy. Please don't say, oh, boring. We've done that lots of times in the Old Testament, gone through umpteen family lines. But bear with me on that. Please don't switch off. The second thing is Joseph's honor. And the third thing is his obedience. And thank you, Catherine, for also bringing out his courage. I didn't put that one in. That was great. So first off, concerning Jesus, being of David's line. We have to go back a couple of verses for that before our reading began, to the first mention of Joseph, which is at the end of the genealogy, that is the family line of Jesus. Now, there are varying interpretations of this family line, especially concerning its comparison with Luke's account, which may lead to the succession through Mary. I'm not going to get into all that stuff, but either way, Joseph and Mary were of the same tribe and family, and within that was the norm. Within those, there were arranged marriages, and they could be as close as first cousins. Yeah. One thing I want to say there is where some translations have Joseph was the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus, that's fine. Others have Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus. Now that might sound really nitpicking, but this "of whom" in the original is apparently, you know, I'm not a language scholar, I'm picking it up from commentaries and things. This "of whom" is in the feminine singular, i.e. it recognizes that as far as Jesus' birth was concerned, Joseph wasn't involved. Okay? But a few points to make concerning this, this genealogy, this family line. We can't call it a family tree because they go back, obviously, through male and female lines. The family lines were hugely important to the Jewish culture and traditions. And they essentially followed the male line of succession. You might want to just think about the Sadducees questioning Jesus, and it's recorded in 3 of the Gospels, so it must have been fairly major. It's in Matthew 22, Mark 12, and Luke 20. And the question came about the interpretation of the law in Deuteronomy 25, whereby if a man died childless, his brother was expected to marry the widowed woman. And if you remember the story, they go on saying, well, this chap, you know, he died and his brother died and his brother died. Well, when they get to heaven, whose wife is he going to be? And Jesus answered them on that one. But that was just the question relating around this male succession line. Then within this sort of patriarchal male-dominated genealogy that we're given here in Matthew, there are a number of people mentioned who are younger brothers. So how did that work? Don't ask me. There are a number who are considered to have been evil. Well, that's a bit odd, isn't it, in the family line for Jesus? There are 4 women, as I've said, it's a male-dominated thing here. 2 of these women were foreigners. There was Rahab from Canaan, and she was also labeled as a harlot. There was Ruth from Moab, and that was a no-no in the Jewish successional line. There were 2 more women who were branded as adulteresses. There was Tamar, and then there was Bathsheba. I have to say I've always had a bit of sympathy for Bathsheba. My great King David namesake really didn't give her many options in that situation, did he? He was the king after all. Anyway, so what, you might ask, about all this genealogy stuff? Well, for one thing, this family line, while coming as prophesied through the line of David, could be considered to be impure. But then, as Paul points out in Romans 8, God sent his son in the likeness of sinful man. Not as a sinful man, but in the likeness of sinful man. Joseph was an ordinary human like us, from a line of ordinary humans like us, whatever their titles might have been. So the next thing is, as we're told that Joseph was already pledged or engaged to Mary, he already had the legal responsibility of fatherhood, whether to a naturally born child of his own, a stepchild, an adopted child, or a foster child. He was legally responsible for the child. So that's Joseph's background, his lineage or his pedigree, or if you like. Moving on, what sort of man, other than ordinary, was he? Well, we're told in verse 19 that he was a righteous man. Remember, as a carpenter, he was unlikely to have been highly educated academically, but as a Jew, he would have known the scriptures and the law. As such, he had every right to publicly divorce Mary, that is, to break off the legally binding engagement. And he had every right to do that as soon as he found out about her pregnancy, according to the law found in Deuteronomy 24, where she could be considered as displeasing him due to her indecency. And that's sort of my paraphrase of a couple of verses there. Or, worse still, he could have had her stoned to death, according to Deuteronomy 22, but he chose neither of these courses, because through his righteousness, he chose to act with honor and with integrity, and it would seem at least a degree of forgiveness, resolving instead to divorce Mary quietly and not expose her to public disgrace. That would have come soon enough if he just let her go if she was pregnant and a single mum. The other outstanding characteristic of this ordinary but righteous man is his obedience to God. As we've seen, he'd already interpreted his duty to Mary as being one of loving forgiveness. And now we hear he has a dream featuring an angel of the Lord. Not quite like in Abba's dream, having a dream of fairy tale endings, even though they do acknowledge a belief in angels in a couple of the lines. But this angel, this messenger of God, gives him clear instruction. Oh, how many of us are jealous of that? If we're honest, how many of us long for clear instruction from God from time to time? And the result of this dream? Well, Joseph did as he was told. He was obedient. And there's a two-way process going on here. Joseph trusted God. Whatever it meant, he trusted God. And God trusted Joseph with this enormous responsibility, as we've already been hearing, this responsibility for the earthly fatherhood of the God incarnate man, Jesus. What a responsibility. Jesus was made man to be amongst us. He had to be brought up as a man. He had to understand men. And that was his father's job, his earthly father's job. So, obedience to God. Think about it a minute. What were the worldly consequences here? I would say most likely, at the very least for Joseph, there was social distancing. No, not the 2-meter rule. But here, keep clear of that bloke. Either he's taken on an impure woman, or he's the one who got her pregnant ahead of time in the first place. Joseph, nah, not a good bloke. Keep clear of him. But there we are. Joseph was obedient and took on this calling. Moving on in Joseph's life, as we've already been told in the clip we had with the children, he has another dream. Okay, you need to move out now. Just pop down to Egypt, a foreign land, with all that implies. Oh, can you think of Joseph just saying, okay, I'll go? Or can you think of Joseph saying, oh, hang on, Lord, I've already hiked 100 miles to be here. Now another couple of 100 miles to somewhere even stranger? Oh, okay, if you say so. Then a bit later, a third dream. Joseph, back you go to Israel. But you said it was dangerous. Yes, but Herod's dead now. Okay, here we go, relocate again. I can relate a bit to this because God has done that to our family several times. Just as we thought we'd settled down somewhere, no, we need to move. Relocate again, and then a fourth dream. Oh, by the way, Herod's son Archelaus, if that's how you pronounce him, is in charge now, and he's even worse than his father. Right. Well, I know, Nazareth's pretty out of the way. I'll go back there. Obedience to God. And he ends up back sort of where he started, but a very changed man. Obedience to God can be pretty demanding. The positive consequences are seen in our own peace and security. And hopefully, if we go further down the line, the extension of God's kingdom and other souls saved. But there can be negative consequences on a human level too. Obedience to God can result in isolation, persecution, even martyrdom. How far will we go? Yeah, just briefly, it would have been about 45.5 years ago. I'd not come to the Lord very long. And I went to a service, and we had, I think it was a missionary speaker, who challenged us with just that question: how far will you go for the Lord? And that troubled me. And I said to a certain young lady I was with at the time, well, I can't get my head around this. How far would I go? How do I know how far I would go? And she, with great wisdom, said, well, you won't know that till you're asked. And she's been giving me wise advice ever since. Sitting beside me now. But Jesus tells us in John 15, greater love has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. Obedience to God, as Joseph showed us.